Seb, the scenes from the evacuations earlier this week were brutal, but what are you hearing from people who've gotten out of Afghanistan today?
Well, Krishna, that's right. I mean, we actually have just heard from somebody who's on a flight that just landed a few hours ago here in Qatar. This is a friend and colleague, an Afghan journalist who's been trying to leave the country for days now with his family ever since he saw the Taliban sweeping across the country. He's been keeping us updated every step of the way, and it's been an incredibly nail-biting process with things potentially falling through at any stage. But he finally texted us just as the doors were closing. He actually didn't know even which country he was going to for sure. He thought it was Qatar, but when he landed, we were able to establish that he had actually landed here at the US military base, Al Udeid. And so that's some good news. There are obviously many, many more that are still in the same predicament, trying to get out of the country. And something that the White House said today is pretty significant. It does seem like they are stepping up flights. Jen Psaki, White House press secretary, was saying that there have actually been 7 flights just in the past 24 hours, and it's Afghan civilians and American citizens as well. There's been 165 American civilians just over the past 24 hours, but it's those Afghan civilians who are also in some of the most risky situations at this point.
Right. And so then what happens when evacuees land in Qatar? Where do they go next?
That's one of the biggest problems. I mean, Afghan nationals don't necessarily have the visa permissions to be able to enter third countries like Qatar. The big question is, what are they going to do? Where are they going to go? Where are they going to be held until they can get their visas processed? The US has been trying to extend the special immigrant visa program, trying to add names to that program so that they can eventually be processed for US visas. But that takes time, and there's also many more Afghans who are at risk and need to leave the country who don't even qualify for that program. And those people applying for visas need to be in a third country while that process happens. So one of the big questions is what's going to happen in the meantime? And the person that we know has no idea what's going to happen next. He doesn't know if he's allowed to leave the military base. He doesn't know which country he's going to potentially go to next or how long he's going to be there. So it's still kind of a very evolving situation here.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Taliban has been all over the media in Afghanistan and the West saying they're a new kind of Taliban, and they're promising that they're not about exacting violence on the Afghans who've remained. And Kabul is pretty calm today. But is that something we can trust?
Well, you're right. I mean, the messaging has been intense. We've been hearing from Taliban spokespeople. The spokesman here has been all over the airwaves on US networks with that same messaging that we heard in the press conference also today. You know, the Taliban are going to respect the rights of women, that the Taliban are not going to be exacting revenge on members of the military forces who fought against them. So they're kind of saying all the things that the international community wants to hear. And I think, you know, what's important to note there is that they're really craving legitimacy. They need the international community's support for this next chapter in Afghanistan's history. So they are saying the things that are going to bring that kind of support. But there are many Afghans that we've been speaking to who are, I mean, you can tell from the numbers trying to leave the country who are afraid for their lives. These are people who remember what it was like 20 years ago under Taliban rule, and there's not a lot of trust that those kinds of attitudes are going to be sustained once the Taliban establishes its control over the country.
Right, and Qatar is also the site of some pretty intense diplomatic negotiations with the Taliban and other international players. How are those negotiations going, and is the Taliban delegation still there?
I actually bumped into Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad, the US Special Envoy here just a short time ago. So there's obviously some kind of meeting happening. There is some discussion that's going to be going on here in Doha, which was the site of those negotiations that dragged on for so long. So it's very hard to predict. We're not quite sure who's going to come into the country next, but there's definitely things happening at a high level. There are discussions going on because obviously in terms of the leverage that the international community has, they want to keep that engagement going. So this is why I think you'll see some diplomatic activity continuing here in Doha.
And in that diplomatic activity, is there more conversations about how this situation will be handled by the international community?
I think right now, for the discussions at the diplomatic level, I mean, the evacuations are front and center. We've heard that from our sources here in Qatar. That's something that is obviously, I mean, you're seeing the images coming out of Afghanistan over the last several days. This is an urgent humanitarian crisis, and it's going to get worse. This is going to be, a refugee problem that the international community has to deal with for a long time to come. But the question of where the refugees are going to be able to stay in the meantime is one that I don't think anyone's really got a clear answer to. Certainly Doha has offered to take a certain amount, and we've heard that they've increased the numbers that they initially were committed to, just given the complete chaos that's unfolded on the ground. But there's no actual solution here in terms of what the longer term answer to all of this is. There is an ongoing humanitarian question for all of those Afghans who are afraid for their lives, that don't want to live under Taliban rule and feel that they're in immediate danger, leaving the country with no place to go.
Well, thank you, Seb, for your reporting. That's Seb Walker in Qatar.